This is Dr. Lee from ReconstructFace.com. This is a lecture that accompanies a plating course. We'll be examining how to properly treat a Panfacial case. For you to fully understand the concepts that are discussed in this lecture, please watch Facial Trauma 102 through 105 and 111 and 112 to cover basic concepts before proceeding with the rest of the lecture. So how do you deal with a Panfacial trauma case? So first, when you deal with such a complex problem, it can be overwhelming. So especially when dealing with a Panfacial case, first thing I like to do, identify all the fractures that I see on imaging. And then you also want to think about what are the unforeseen problems that may not seem as obvious at the moment. So you got to be thinking about what should I be aware of that I'm not aware of right now. Because there may be other injuries that are more severe and more time urgent, such as carotid injuries or intracranial hemorrhage, that when you're so focused on the fractures, you don't see the bigger picture in the sense that they need to have their carotid images sooner, maybe need to be stented, or they have a head bleed, they need to be drained first. So you do also want to think about the bigger picture and see what are the other unforeseen problems. Next, the fractures and the problems that you've identified, you need to figure out if they need to have a surgical intervention or any type of medical intervention, and if so, in what sequence, what are the time urgency. So in this process, you can break a group of fractures into a smaller unit and then decide which one of these smaller units needs to be treated first. Next, when you decide to perform surgery for a particular problem, you want to think about relevant anatomy that's located in that location. This will help you minimize complications by recognizing what are the structures that you should preserve and protect in the process. Next is to figure out what surgical approach you're going to use. And you want to use the most direct route to the site that you need to reach, with in mind that you want to minimize any cosmetic or functional loss in the process. So there may be a multiple approach to one location, but by trying to avoid a particular set of problems, it will help you guide to figure out what the optimal approach will be for that particular situation. Next, you're going to figure out what step's going to go first, then followed by the next step, and continue that process until you reach closing. Next is to perform preoperative preparation, such as obtaining medical clearance or preoperative imaging that may be used during the case. Now, before you do your case, it's important to visualize the entire surgical procedure from incision to closing. By doing this exercise in your head, you actually get a preview of what the case might be like. And actually will bring up certain situations that might alter your approach and troubleshoot problems that you might have before they actually occur. Next, once you have this visualization completed and you have a pretty solid working plan in your head, you want to execute your plan in reality. Now, during the surgery, it is very important to make adjustments, because during the surgery you might find new things that you did not anticipate or conditions that have now changed during the surgery. After the surgery, it's critical that you assess your surgical outcome. So for trauma cases, that generally means obtaining a postoperative CT scans, but also means you follow them postoperatively and maybe even long-term to see what kind of complications, what kind of issues that they have, so that now you could refine your approach for the next patient to decrease your complications and further optimize your surgical technique. When you operate long enough, you're going to have complications. And I feel that what makes a good surgeon versus a bad surgeon is how you behave when a complication arises, even when it's not your fault, even if it is due to factors that are out of your control. Generally, you want to start out by apologizing to the patient and try to make yourself as available as possible to them. Start out by explaining to the patient what is going on at the moment and why you think it may have happened. And then come up with a plan to correct the situation. You may have to consult with someone more experienced to help you come up with a plan to remedy the situation and increase the odds of proper healing in your favor. Lastly, your complication rate will be only as high as what you're willing to accept. Now we know 0% is not possible, but if you aim for that 0%, your complication rate will continue to decrease and your surgical outcome will be more consistent with minimal complication rate. And your goal ultimately is to have consistent surgical outcomes, less complication rate, and decreased OR time. So these are the things that you want to think about. How can I make it go faster? How can I make it more consistent? How can I make my complication rate less? And if you do this with every single case, you're going to get an idea that will gradually refine your technique so that you can do those things in a very predictable fashion. To start off, I'd like you to print out the picture of this fracture pattern, and I'd like you to think about these questions. First, identify the fracture that you're seeing. Number 2, I'd like you to draw the type of skin or mucosal incision that you'll make, and then also draw in plates that you think is appropriate for that fracture. Next, think about the sequence in which individual plates will be applied. So with that in mind, we'll start out by discussing these fracture patterns and break it down into smaller units, and then we'll put it all back together at the end. So here we have right parasymphysis and left angle fracture. Here we have zygomedical maxillary complex fracture involving the 4 suture sites. And here your Le Fort 1 fracture involving the hard palate with bilateral pterygoid fracture involvement. We'll briefly discuss how to secure one's airway and also discuss how to expose fractures, reduce it, and apply MMF to restore occlusion. And when determining the proper sequence of repair, you generally want to start out with your easier fracture and work towards a harder fracture. An easier fracture in this sense is it's not comminuted and has good bony visual reference. And a harder fracture is a type of fracture with comminution and poor bony reference. So whenever you deal with Panfacial case, you need to consider what the best way to secure one's airway. Typically, if you have midfacial fractures with mobile palate or mandible fracture, by default, you're going to have malocclusion. One of the key steps is to provide premorbid occlusion by performing maxillomandibular fixation. To achieve this, mandibular and maxillary teeth must touch against each other to reestablish premorbid occlusion. One thing to consider is how you're going to secure one's airway, because if you place endotracheal tube through the mouth, the endotracheal tube will have to come out between the teeth and will prevent you from putting the patient into maxillomandibular fixation. In rare situations where you have multiple molar teeth that are missing, you may be still able to orally intubate the patient and perform maxillomandibular fixation. As such, if you have to perform maxillomandibular fixation, it's best to consider performing transnasal intubation as long as there's no extensive skull base injury or there's no need to plate the medial buttress. Another option is to consider submental intubation. This is a technique where a patient is first intraorally intubated and then an incision is made within floor mouth that connects into the submental region, and the endotracheal tube is tunneled through that incision. This will allow you to perform maxillomandibular fixation and perform rest of the procedure. At the end of the case, endotracheal tube is tunneled back into the oral cavity and extubated. Generally consider this option in younger patients with cosmetic concerns for tracheostomy scars. The downside of this approach is that you're switching from a stable airway to unstable airway when you're tunneling the endotracheal tube through the submental region and pulling it through the chin skin. And at the end of the case, you're also going from stable to unstable when you disconnect the circuit to tunnel the endotracheal tube back into the mouth. So this isn't ideal in patients with poor pulmonary reserve and also in patients that expect to have prolonged ventilatory support. The last option is performing tracheostomy, which again, there is a downside of a scar, but this is by far the most stable and safest way of securing one's airway, especially if the patient requires long-term ventilator support. In this particular case, intraoral intubation is not preferred because patient doesn't have missing molars. Nasotracheal intubation is also not preferred because patient has bilateral medial buttress fracture that needs to be plated. So then we end up with either submental intubation or tracheostomy as our two choices for securing the airway. So for a panfacial fracture case such as this, you can have a plate configuration that looks like this. And the important thing is you can have a wide range of correct plate configuration. And the important thing is to understand key principles that's unique to each subunit and select the type of plate that would provide optimal structural integrity at that location. Once you have your plate configuration figured out, your goal is to decide which sequence you're going to perform the plate application for all the plates you have decided to plate. Historically, people have discussed performing it top down, bottom up, inside out, or outside in. But in reality, I think the best approach is doing it from the easy to hard, meaning start out with your easiest fracture, plate it, and then move on to your next fracture. The reason for this is that if you plate a fracture incorrectly, that error will be compounded as you move towards your next fracture. So it's imperative to start out with the easiest fracture and get that reduced and plated with minimal error as possible to avoid compounding error throughout the rest of the fracture segments. Next, think about your ideal sequence of events to perform all the procedures. We'll start out by securing the patient's airway by using submental intubation or tracheostomy. We're going to start out with hybrid arch bar application, proceed with maxillomandibular fixation, then we'll start out with the right parasymphyseal fracture, then move on to angle fracture. The reason for this is that assuming that both fractures are not comminuted, angle fracture is going to be almost always more difficult than parasymphyseal fracture, as parasymphyseal fracture is much easier to expose, whereas angle fracture is more posterior and harder to expose and visualize during reduction process. Next, we'll work on the right Le Fort 1 fracture. The reason we're going to start with the right side is that if you look at the left side, there's a left ZMC and left Le Fort 1. So there's a high probability that the lateral buttress along the zygomatical maxillary suture line might be comminuted. So we'll work with the right Le Fort 1 fracture, then move on to the left side at the zygomatical frontal suture line and begin with the left ZMC fracture repair next. Next, I'll jump down to the medial buttress of the Le Fort 1 along the left piriform aperture, as there's a higher probability of this particular bone segment being intact, while the lateral buttress on the left will be most likely be more comminuted with poor visual cues for bony reduction. And once I have surrounding fractures reduced, I'll then focus on the lateral buttress, as this will be most likely the most unstable fracture segment with adjacent Le Fort and ZMC fracture. Once the lateral buttress, which is a major support mechanism, has been stabilized, I'll then look at the horizontal buttress, which makes up the infraorbital rim. If there's excess instability with mobile bone segment, I'll then proceed with placing an additional plate along the infraorbital rim. And lastly, the zygomatic arch fracture also makes up a minor support mechanism, and as long as you have good reduction in these three other fracture sites, this area does not need to be plated. Here, we have a summary of the sequence in which the hardware was applied. That concludes part 1 of this lecture. In part 2, I'll demonstrate how to apply the hardware using the same case example that you can also replicate in the trauma plating course. Thank you for watching.